Good morning and welcome to today's community chat. We're going to be speaking with Virginia Beach History Museums about two prominent women and maybe some extra information as we go. So we're going to start with Grace Sherwood and then Susanna Thorowgood, so two prominent women in Virginia Beach. And I am going to bring on Maddie Lang with Virginia Beach History Museums. Thank you, Maddie, for joining us this morning and for sharing, some of this great history with us for Women's History Month.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Sarah. It's a pleasure.
And I'm sure you're used to doing this and sure you're used to speaking about these women. So, I'm going to start by letting you, get us started with Grace Sherwood and sort of just, bringing us back to that time where she lived in our area and just who she was.
Yeah, for sure. So good morning, everybody. My name is Maddie Lang. I am the Program and Events Associate with Virginia Beach History Museums with the Department of Cultural Affairs for the City of Virginia Beach. Again, thank you for having me, Sarah. Going into Grace Sherwood, she was a prominent figure in the Princess Anne County area. Now we know it as Virginia Beach. And the area of Congo, which we know it as today. Back then, it was Princess Anne County. She was a midwife and a healer. She was a mother as well. She was married to her husband, James Sherwood. Unfortunately, he did pass away in 1701, and it was after this point that Grace found herself being accused of witchcraft in 1706. Um, this was a time where a lot of people were just afraid of different allegations. Weird things were happening: storms, crops failing, um, livestock dying. And unfortunately, Grace may not have been well liked, and this could have been the reason for her being accused of witchcraft at this time. um, you know Unlike people in the community, she had a lot of allegations pointed at her, crazy ones like going in through people's keyholes, turning into a cat, just like ridiculous things, riding in an eggshell, all these ridiculous things that people just sort of obviously made up. And she found herself being accused of witchcraft in 1706, and then later in the summer of 1706 was put on trial for witchcraft. They took it to the Attorney General of Williamsburg, and unfortunately, they didn't have enough evidence to put in order to prosecute her. So they came back to the county court and said, "We need more evidence." So the county court didn't really know what to do. They decided that they were going to do a trial by water with Grace Sherwood. And back then, at this time in the early 18th century, water was seen as being pure, and it would reject anything that was not pure. So they would take Grace and they tied her up with some ropes, tied her thumbs to her toes, crossed her arms, and they would have thrown her in the water. And it was a trial by water. So if she sunk, she was innocent and not a witch. And if she floated, she was guilty. And unfortunately, Grace did float, so she was um, charged with being a witch. And she would have spent a year in jail, probably about a year, and then she would have gone back to her house because she was a widow. And at this time, widows actually had more property rights than married women. And we'll see that again with Susanna later, that Grace was able to hold on to her property until she died in the 1740s. So quite a long time, from 1706 to 1740. And she would have stayed in the area. She stayed there her whole life, most likely because it was her property, it was her home, it was all she knew. So she ended up just living in the area and keeping hold of her property, running a farm, maintaining it, um, all those kinds of things. So yeah, she's a prominent area now, known as the Witch of Congo. And she's a really great figure to study and dive into. And she's a good example of her time that she lived in as more of a working class woman. She would have been working her farm, maintaining her property, and she would have done this all by herself. In her home, we believe perhaps it could have been a wooden structure, something of more middle class, indicative of her wealth and her status and things like that. Where you see upper class, we'll see with Susanna, have a different style of house and things like that. So if you have any other questions about Grace, I'm happy to
Absolutely.
dig
And I
in
just want to
deeper.
point out for our viewers, there is B-roll between us, and you will see the Grace Sherwood statue. That is one of the photos featured throughout this B-roll. And, I think it's interesting because people might come upon, Witch Duck Road or some of these things, and they might have some thoughts about, maybe where that witch idea came from. Is that any relation to Grace Sherwood?
It is absolutely. So Witch Duck Road is named after it's. She was tried by water, and modern it's now known as Witch Duck Point, and it would have been called a witch ducking in the water. So that was the whole process of tying her up and throwing her into the water to see if she sank or float. So now it's named Witch Duck Road, of course, after what occurred there in 1706. And they do I'm not sure if they've done it since COVID, but in the past they've done an annual reenactment of the witch ducking. So that's a great, you can go and see her likeness. We of course don't have any pictures, so it's kind of like a best guess at what she could have looked like. Um, but yeah, unfortunately, there aren't any depictions of her that survive from the time period or anything like that. So yeah, that's a
And then
great spot to
she was
do that.
later pardoned, correct, for her
Yeah.
crimes.
So in 2006, Governor Tim Kaine restored her good name, 300 years to the day since the ducking that condemned her for witchcraft originally. So her name has been restored, and she's been, now we all know she's innocent.
And it's all over Virginia Beach. So I think it is interesting if you're visiting, if you're a local, to sort of know that connection between Witch Duck Road and the woman behind it, who you might not know her story. I mean, I think I've heard of her, down here quite a bit, even just driving. Obviously you turn on that road, but I think it's really interesting to be able to know what some of these names are behind it. And we'll get into that too with Susanna Thorowgood.
Yeah, Grace was really an amazing woman of her time. She was doing things that perhaps other women were not doing at the time, tending to their fields. She was a healer, so she had knowledge of herbs and nature that other people may not have had. So she was a little bit more educated. So perhaps that's why people didn't quite understand her or maybe didn't like her as much. But yeah, she's very interesting, and she's a great figure to study for some local history.
And I just wanted to connect something. I spoke with the Hampton History Museums yesterday, and they also had cases of witchcraft, within their history. I mean, obviously very close, but I think people sometimes, they think of Massachusetts and they think of, witchcraft in Salem up there, but it is interesting that this sort of pervaded through, different areas during that time.
Right, right. And it just comes back to people who were superstitious, um, and just weren't well educated and were unsure, and anything bad happened. That was kind of their explanation. They didn't have the modern, information that we have these days to just, look on the internet and look at something. They may not even have access to education at that time. So in their minds, the easiest, solution to their problems was, oh, let's blame this lady who nobody likes,
Wow.
kind of.
Yeah. Well, we can move to Susanna Thorogood, and just so viewers, I see people, tuning in and commenting. So what you're seeing right now is a lot of photos that you all provided from Thorogood House, and maybe after our story we can sort of talk about what some of these images are. But if you're joining us, some of these images are from that. We also will get to the quilt, which is a really interesting artifact that you all have there. But if you just same with Grace, if you could just give us sort of some background on Susanna, I think that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So Susanna Thorogood was married to Argyll the Second. Argyll was the second Thorogood. So we have a line that we can trace back to the beginnings of the Thorogood in this area, which would have been in the 1620s. So we have Adam Thorogood, who first comes to Princess Anne County, and he's the one that secures that land, purchases it for his family, and then later you have Adam's great grandson Argyll II, who marries Susanna, and they were the ones that were responsible for building the house that's there now. And their son John was responsible for making a lot of the renovations to the house, making it more stylish, more fashionable. And it really denotes a status of wealth, where Grace or some other middle class people would be seen with like wooden structures. The Thorowgoods have this immaculate brick house that's just amazing craftsmanship. It's got paint. Paint was always a huge status in the 18th century. Colors were a huge status symbol. So we've got that brick, which is full of rich tones, warm tones, and bricks were expensive. So that really denotes like their status and their wealth at the time in this area. So Argyll was responsible for building the house, starting construction in 1719. Unfortunately, in that same year, he passes away suddenly, leaving Susanna with the house and the property. It passes to the widow. And in some aspects, like with Grace, widows have more freedoms and more rights to their property, their land, to manage everything. So it was left to her. but she ended up having to petition the courts in order to finish construction on her house, because legally there were some restrictions that wouldn't allow her to do so. And we believe it's possible that her name, her Thorowgood name, may have helped with her petition. So if someone of a lower status perhaps may have encountered other struggles that Susanna may not have because of her political connections and her family connections with the Thorowgoods. So she was able to finish the house in 1719, and she lived in that house until she passed away in the 1740s. So she was managing the house. They also had, which was a plantation at the time, and they would have had enslaved people on their property to manage some of the house as well as some of the crops and the agriculture and things like that. They also were responsible for running a ferry system that would have ran up and down the Lynnhaven River. So when her husband died, Susanna took possession of that and managed it, ran it until she passed away. And that ferry would have gone along the Lynnhaven River, which is right behind the house. So yeah, so that's kind of her story. She does remarry eventually. She marries a gentleman named Captain Richard Cheshire, and we believe that it was more of a benefit to help her children, so that they would have that status symbol. And it might have been a little scandalous to have like an unwed mother and things like that, and also to protect her claim to the house, so it wouldn't pass to a family member. It would stay within the family, um, things like that. But yeah, that's kind of who she
Absolutely. And we have
was.
one question, sorry to cut you off, from our viewers. Her spelling of her name is different from the home, and I noticed that too. Is there any reason for that? Or maybe that's just the way it ended up being said out loud or translated, for maybe someone who didn't get it? Or what is the reason behind that, if you know?
So it's a really simple reason. In the 18th century, there was not standardized spelling. We were also missing some letters from the alphabet, like the J is a big one that we're missing. So a lot of things are spelled phonetically. So it was probably spelled multiple ways. Later on, standardized spelling would have occurred, and they changed the spelling later on. And that's how we spell it today. But in the historical record, we see it spelled that other way with the W.
Thank you. That's interesting, and hopefully that
Yeah.
answers that viewer's question. In terms of the home, and we're seeing some of the rooms here. I mean, you all do keep, I guess it quite in the olden days time. We see some costumes, we see some people walking around. I'm assuming they, give tours, and you all tell, stories on the property. Can you tell us a little bit about, some of the images we're seeing here?
Yeah, so our house, the Thurgood House, is interpreted in the year 1762, which is when Susanna and Argyl's son, John I, is managing the house. He's overseeing it. He's the master of the house, basically. And so that's the year we interpret it. So when you walk into the house, you are in 1762. And we kind of talk about the family at that time. So we keep the space interpreted to kind of things you would have seen in that era, what the family would have been doing. They had 9 children in the house at that time. So you've got 9 children as well as enslaved people living in the house. It was a bustling household. It was a plantation. You've got things going on. So we try to give people the whole picture of the house at that time. So you can see like we have antiques that are furnished as in the way that the house would have been. We also work very hard to preserve the house, and we have a wonderful team that assists us with that. Um, but yeah, and we give tours. We're open Thursday to Sundays, and tours are free, no reservation required as well. So anybody's welcome to come and take a tour. We also do a number of special events, which you can find on our website throughout the year. But yeah, that's kind of like a little bit of what we do day to day. So yeah, we also have a lovely gallery there as well in our education center.
Absolutely. And then, we're seeing this quilt pop up, and I don't want people to think, it's just a random bedspread that's in the home. I mean, it's a really special, rare artifact that you all have. Can you just talk about this 18th century quilt?
Yeah, so that is our indigo Calamenco quilt. Right now, it's upstairs in our second bedroom, which we interpret as what likely have been the girls' bedrooms, and their names were Peggy and Pembroke, and they were John's daughters. The quilt is significant because it is a rare piece, and it's historically significant not only because of the interesting color and the tree of life pattern that's on it. It's a medallion shape. It's really intricate, really beautiful. This would have been something that a wealthy person would have purchased and used in their house. Again, another symbol of wealth. The things that you have in your house also indicate your status and your wealth, as well as the outside appearance of your house. Um, but yeah, it's So it's made of wool, and it's made of something called calamanco wool, which would have been wool that they would have heated. They would have either used like a roller to heat it or a rock, and it gives it this nice sheen. It's really beautiful, a pretty sheen to make it kind of shiny, almost like silk. But it is wool. It's whole cloth that would have been purchased from England. Um, and we're not sure if it was made and manufactured in England, or it's possible it could have been made here in America in the New England area. So those are our two possibilities. We're not sure. It's not an original to our house, but it is original to the time period of the 18th century. And we recently received an award from the Virginia Association of Museums for $1,000 in order to get this quilt conserved. So we're moving forward with that, and we're very excited that this piece is gonna be able to get the attention and the care that it needs in order to be there for future generations to enjoy, for other historians to study in the future. We're also hoping to get a complete reproduction of the quilt so people can handle it, look at it, study it. We can put that on display or perhaps loan it to other museums. So we're really excited. It's a really amazing piece, and it's a very unique piece to have as well in our collection.
Absolutely. And I think, in speaking with you all today and speaking at the Hampton History Museum yesterday, I mean, just continuing to share pieces of the history that maybe are less known or, just deserve to be highlighted, I think is certainly, an important piece that, organizations like you all do. So I think, to get highlighted for that and to have kept something, in such good condition in your property is amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And, I know we talked a little bit about the home, but is there anything else, coming up? I know as people get outside for the spring, summer, there might be tourists, there might be other people in town that are, more likely to get over to the museum and get outside. But is there anything sort of coming down, the schedule here that you wanted to, mention or speak about?
Yeah, we always have a ton of stuff going on. We've got some spring events. Our next event is our Highland Spring Tea, and it's a Scottish themed tea. We'll be at Thorowgood outside. We're going to have a lecture, some live music, a demo, as well as some amazing treats. Our tickets are on sale on our website, so you can check that out. It's vbmuseums.org. Our communications guy giving me a thumbs up. So, and then we also have in the spring at our Lynnhaven House property, another historic house that we manage, we're doing a Mother's Day craft tea, and those tickets are on sale as well. So it's a floral workshop. We also have coming up in May and later this summer, we have a lecture from History Before Us, and these are free programming. That'll be at the end of May. And we also have another program on Great Sherwood later this summer with Dr. Scott Moore, who we were lucky enough to have come speak last October. So definitely check our website out and come down and see us. And Thorowgood's open Thursday to Sundays for free tours as well.
Thank you, Maddie. And I'll link your website in here as well so that if anyone's watching this now or later, they'll be able to go there. And it'll also be on wavy.com so people can head over there, for additional information from our chat and from, to view other resources. But thank you so much for joining us. Just to give you, some feedback, I think we have some, very excited viewers who, definitely appreciate all of the history education this morning. So thank you so much for joining us, and hopefully with future exhibits, we'll have you back next time.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you so much for having us.
Absolutely. Thank you to everyone watching. You can watch this on YouTube, Facebook, and wavy.com. If you have any questions for Maddie or for the website, please, head over to Virginia Beach History Museums if you're viewing this later and see if they can answer your questions. So thank you.